I gripped the edge of the vanity, my knuckles white as I stared at my reflection. The soft glow of the morning light filtered through my bedroom window, casting a warm golden hue across the bridal gown hanging beside me. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. Delicate lace sleeves, a fitted bodice, a flowing train. Today was supposed to be my day, but I could feel it. The storm brewing just beneath the surface. A soft knock at the door. "Linda?" I turned to see my fiancé, Daniel, peeking in, his expression unreadable. That wasn't good. Daniel always wore his emotions like a billboard. Joy, excitement, frustration. But right now, his face was carefully neutral. I set my brush down. "What happened?" He stepped in and closed the door behind him. "Your sister called me last night." My stomach twisted. "She's coming to the wedding, isn't she?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Daniel let out a slow breath. "Not just coming. She wants to walk down the aisle, before you, in a wedding dress." Silence. Deafening. A slow, creeping horror seeped into my veins, and for a moment I thought I might actually laugh. It was absurd, insulting, but at the same time, so painfully predictable. My sister Emma had been my parents' golden child for as long as I could remember. If she wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, I got whatever was left over. And now she wanted my wedding. I clenched my jaw, forcing the wave of bitterness down. And my parents? Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing a hand over his face. They're backing her up. They think it's only fair since she's older and hasn't gotten married yet. My grip on the vanity tightened. Only fair. Fair. That word had never once worked in my favor. I took a deep breath. "And what did you say?" Daniel met my eyes, and for the first time since he walked in, a slow, almost mischievous smile tugged at his lips. I told them I'd think about it. My brows furrowed. "Think about it?" And then he leaned forward, his voice low. "Linda, we're going to use this to our advantage." I blinked. Daniel was many things. Kind, loyal, protective. But one thing people always underestimated about him? He was calculating when he needed to be. "Do you really think I'd ever let this happen?" He continued, his tone turning sharper. "That I'd stand by while your sister turns our wedding into her personal fantasy?" I swallowed hard. "Then why not shut it down immediately?" "Because if we say no now, they'll just try to sabotage things another way." His fingers tapped against the bedpost. "But if they think they're getting what they want, we control the game." A shiver ran down my spine. I knew that look. I had seen it before, when Daniel had dealt with a corrupt landlord overcharging us for our first apartment. When a coworker had tried to throw him under the bus for missing reports. It was the look of someone setting a trap. A slow smile crept across my lips. "Tell me the plan." Daniel leaned in, his voice a whisper. "We let them believe they've won. We let Emma think she'll have her moment. Let my in-laws feel like they're helping by paying for things." He paused. "Then, when the day comes, we make sure she never gets the chance to walk down that aisle." A surge of something, vindication, excitement, power, bubbled in my chest. For the first time in my life, my sister was about to learn what it felt like to lose. I took a slow breath, letting Daniel's words sink in. We let them think they've won. It was a dangerous game. If we weren't careful, they'd walk all over us. If we played it right, my sister would finally experience what it felt like to be blindsided. I turned to Daniel, my voice steady. "All right, tell me exactly what we're going to do." His grin widened. "First, we give them just enough control to feel confident. Then, we tighten the leash until they're too deep to back out." I nodded. "And my parents?" Daniel leaned back against the bedpost. "They'll follow her lead. If she pushes for something, they'll push for it too. So we let her push, just not where it actually matters. I exhaled. This would take patience. Years of conditioning had taught me that arguing with my parents never worked. They twisted everything until I was the problem, until I was ungrateful, difficult, selfish. But if we played this right, we'd finally turn their own tactics against them. The next evening, I sat across from my parents and Emma in the living room of my childhood home. My mother sat primly on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap like she was attending a royal meeting. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. And Emma? She was practically vibrating with excitement, her fingers tapping against the armrest, her lips twitching with barely concealed smugness. So, my mother began, smoothing her blouse. Daniel told us he was open to discussing the arrangement. Have you had time to think about it? I forced a tight smile. Yes. Emma perked up. And I glanced at Daniel, playing my part. I hesitated, just enough to make it seem like I was struggling with the idea. I don't love it, I admitted, twisting my hands in my lap. But if it means keeping the peace in the family, I'm willing to make some compromises. Emma let out a soft gasp, like she'd just been granted a royal title. My father grunted in approval. That's very mature of you, Linda. My mother nodded. We knew you'd see reason. Reason. Right. Emma, unable to contain herself any longer, leaned forward. I already have a dress picked out, she gushed. I mean, obviously it won't be white, just a very pale champagne. But I found this stunning mermaid cut and it's so elegant. When I walk down the aisle first, people will just think I'm a part of the bridal party. It'll be symbolic, you know? A blessing almost, from the older sister to the younger. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. A blessing? From her to me? Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, a silent reminder to hold steady. That sounds interesting, I said, keeping my voice measured. But if we're going to do this, I have a few conditions. The energy in the room shifted. My parents tensed slightly, and Emma tilted her head. Conditions? She echoed, as if the concept was foreign to her. Daniel jumped in smoothly. Just little things. If we're making adjustments for Emma, then we'll need some help with the extra costs. That means budgeting for an upgraded venue, extra seating, catering. He gave a careful pause. We'll need some financial support. My mother waved a dismissive hand. Oh, that's not a problem. Of course we'll help. We want this to be special for both of you. Perfect, Daniel continued. Also, since Emma will be in the procession, we need to coordinate the dresses carefully. It has to look right in photos, which means we should get our dresses from the same boutique to ensure the colors complement each other. Emma's eyes widened with excitement. Yes, we can go dress shopping together. I swallowed my revulsion and forced a smile. That would be great. What I didn't say was that I already had my dream dress. It was waiting for me at a boutique 2 towns over, far away from Emma's meddling hands. My father grunted again. Anything else? Daniel nodded. We'll also need to book a top-tier photographer and videographer. If Emma is going to be part of the ceremony, we want to make sure it's documented properly. My mother smiled. Of course. And finally, I said, tilting my head just slightly, if Emma is walking down the aisle first, she won't be a bridesmaid, right? Emma blinked. Huh? I kept my tone light, innocent. Well, if she's getting a moment in the spotlight, then she can't also be part of the bridal party. It would just be too much focus on one person. I think it's only fair. Emma's face twitched. I could see the hesitation flicker across her features. She hadn't expected to lose anything in this exchange, but she had already won too much to argue now. She let out a delicate laugh, flipping her hair. I suppose that makes sense. A small sacrifice for such a special moment. And just like that, I had removed her from my wedding party. It wasn't a major victory yet, but it was the first step. Daniel's fingers brushed against mine again, his silent way of saying, "You did it." As the conversation wrapped up, my parents looked pleased. Emma looked triumphant, and Daniel and I looked like we had conceded. But in reality, we had set the stage. They had just paid for their own downfall. If there was one thing I had learned from growing up in my family, it was this: never let them see you coming. The moment we walked out of my parents' house, Daniel let out a low whistle. That was something. I exhaled, the weight of the night pressing down on me. I can't believe she actually thinks she's going to pull this off. Daniel grinned. Oh, she'll try. But by the time we're done, she won't even see it coming. The plan was in motion. Now we just had to make sure Emma, my parents, and everyone else kept believing it. A week later, Emma and I stood in front of a boutique mirror, each of us in our respective gowns. She was twirling, examining herself from every angle, completely absorbed in her reflection. The champagne-colored dress was far too bridal for someone who wasn't the bride, but I had expected nothing less. Meanwhile, I stood in a simple, elegant white gown. Not my real dress, of course. That was safely hidden away, untouched by Emma's interference. Oh, Linda, she sighed, spinning once more. I just know people are going to be so emotional when they see me walk first. It's going to be such a powerful moment. I forced a smile, biting down on my tongue so hard I could taste blood. Powerful? The only thing powerful about that moment would be her realization that she'd never actually walked down my aisle. The sales assistant approached, smiling warmly. Are we saying yes to the dresses? Emma nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. My parents are covering the cost, of course. I let out a small, innocent laugh. Oh, Emma, we should let them spoil us a little. After all, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Emma beamed. My words had worked like a charm. Once in a lifetime. She thought this was her moment. She had no idea we were building her up just to let her fall. Daniel had already taken care of everything. The dress order would never be processed. A few days before the wedding, Emma would receive a call letting her know there had been a mix-up and her dress hadn't arrived on time. And since she refused to put anything in writing, per Daniel's careful suggestion, there would be nothing she could do about it. She'd be left scrambling at the last minute. I wondered how much of a powerful moment it would be then. The next part of the plan? The guest list. My mother had insisted on handling the invitations, under the pretense of making things easier for me. What she really wanted was control. Daniel and I knew better than to argue, so we agreed. But we also made a minor adjustment before the final list was printed. See, my parents had ensured that Emma's friends were invited, even people I barely knew. Meanwhile, some of my closest friends had mysteriously been left out. Daniel discreetly mentioned this to my mother, making it seem like he was on her side. Linda's been so stressed, he had told her. I don't think she even noticed the changes. She ate it up. She had no idea that Daniel had already printed a second set of invitations and sent them out behind her back. By the time she realized my friends were at the wedding, it would be too late to do anything about it. Meanwhile, Emma's group? Their invitations would mysteriously never arrive. We had one last deception to set up before the wedding. It was risky, but if it worked, it would guarantee that Emma would be exactly where we needed her on the big day. Daniel and I invited my parents and Emma over for dinner. I played the nervous bride, pretending I was having second thoughts about our arrangement. I just don't want any surprises, I murmured, keeping my voice small, vulnerable. I know Emma wants this to be special, but I can't handle any last-minute changes. Emma huffed, rolling her eyes. Linda, you worry too much. Just trust me. Oh, Emma, I already knew she had a plan to upstage me. The fake aisle walk wasn't enough for her. She was planning something else. We just needed to flush her out. So I took the bait. You promise you won't do anything unexpected? I asked. No surprises, no extra speeches, no... Linda, Emma smirked. I wouldn't dream of it. She was lying, of course. We just had to wait and see what she was planning. Because whatever it was, Daniel and I would be one step ahead. As they left, Daniel pulled me into his arms, whispering against my ear, You're doing great. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. The stage was set. Emma had no idea the wedding she thought she was stealing would never happen for her. She was about to get exactly what she deserved. The morning of my wedding arrived with an eerie sense of calm. I should have been nervous, my stomach tied in knots. But as I sat in my bridal suite sipping my coffee, I felt nothing but anticipation. Today wasn't just my wedding day. It was the day Emma would finally learn what it felt like to lose. The first sign that everything was going wrong for Emma came at 9:17 a.m. I was getting my hair done when my phone vibrated on the table beside me. I glanced down and saw a text from my mother. Mom. Linda, we have a huge problem. Emma's dress is missing. The boutique says it was never ordered. I felt my lips twitch. Oh, Emma, this was exactly the moment we had been waiting for. I took a slow sip of my coffee before responding. Me. Oh no, that's awful. What happened? Her reply was instant. Mom, I don't know. Emma is panicking. She says she confirmed the order, but they're claiming she never did. Can you call them? I let the message sit there. I wasn't about to rush to help my sister fix a problem that had been carefully orchestrated. 10 minutes later, another message came in. Mom. Linda, please. This is a disaster. I finally replied. Me. I'm so sorry, but I can't get involved right now. I'm getting ready for my wedding. I'm sure Emma will figure something out. I could picture exactly what was happening at that moment. Emma, standing in front of a mirror, her hair half done, screaming at my parents. My mother frantically calling the boutique, demanding to know what had happened. My father, already in his suit, pacing back and forth, barking orders at anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, Daniel and I, we were exactly where we needed to be. At 10:30 a.m., Daniel received a text from his brother. Brother, bro, you need to see this. Attached was a photo of Emma's friends standing outside the venue, confused and angry. Their invitations had never arrived. Daniel's response? Daniel, that's so weird. Maybe they got lost in the mail? By now, my parents must have realized something was wrong. The guest list had been tampered with. Emma's dress had mysteriously vanished, but they were too busy scrambling to fix everything to actually put the pieces together. And that's when the final blow landed. At exactly 12:15 p.m., my father called me. I ignored it. At 12:17 p.m., he called again. This time, I picked up. Dad? I answered sweetly. Linda, he said, his voice tense. We have a serious situation. Emma is at the venue, but they won't let her inside. I pretended to frown. What? What do you mean? The security, he snapped. They're saying she's not allowed in. I sighed, shifting in my chair. Oh, Dad, that's strange. I specifically told the venue that only invited guests should be allowed in. Maybe her name wasn't on the list? There was a pause. A moment where I knew my father was trying to piece it all together. You did this, he finally said, his voice dropping. I smiled. Did what? You set her up. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. You know I've been so busy with wedding planning. I didn't even handle the guest list. Mom did. Another pause. I could hear my mother's voice in the background, frantic, Emma screeching like a banshee. My father lowered his voice. Fix this. Now. I let out a small laugh. Dad, I'm the bride. I don't think I should be dealing with this right before I walk down the aisle, do you? He exhaled sharply. Linda, gotta go, I chirped, then ended the call. I turned to Daniel, who had been listening the whole time, his expression positively gleeful. She's outside? He asked. I nodded. Perfect. While I stood inside the bridal suite, safe and serene, Emma was losing her mind at the entrance. Security, who had been briefed well in advance, stood firm. I don't care what the list says, Emma shrieked. This is my sister's wedding. Let me in. One of the guards checked his clipboard. Ma'am, if your name isn't on the list, we can't allow you entry. Venue policy. Emma turned to my father. Dad, do something. But my father, for the first time in his life, was completely powerless. Because there was no proof, no emails, no written agreements, just his word against ours. You're making a mistake, he warned the guards. But they didn't care. They were being paid well to do their job. And their job was keeping Emma out. Inside, the music began to play. I stood at the entrance of the chapel, my bouquet in hand, radiating peace as my guests turned to look at me. There were whispers. People had heard. People knew, and yet, as I took my first step down the aisle, I felt something I had never felt before. Freedom. I wasn't walking in Emma's shadow anymore. This was my moment. I caught Daniel's gaze at the altar. His pride, his love, his silent, we did it. Outside, my sister was probably still screaming. Inside, I was finally free. As the wedding ceremony concluded and Daniel and I were officially pronounced husband and wife, a wave of triumph washed over me. For the first time in my life, Emma hadn't won. She hadn't taken something from me. She hadn't made me an afterthought. But the real battle was just beginning. Because outside, Emma wasn't done. By the time we made our way to the reception hall, the atmosphere was electric with whispers. People knew something had happened. Some guests had stepped outside and seen the chaos firsthand. Others had heard about it through the family grapevine. And those who didn't know? They could sense the tension. I spotted my mother and father standing near the entrance, their faces like thunderclouds. They hadn't even congratulated me. But honestly, that wasn't surprising. I wasn't their priority today. Emma was. I squeezed Daniel's hand. Ready for the next round? He grinned. Oh, I've been waiting for this. We barely made it to our table before my mother stormed over. Linda. Her voice was sharp, controlled, but her eyes raging. I turned to her with the most innocent expression I could muster. Mom, I'm so glad you could make it. Isn't it a beautiful day? She didn't bite. You humiliated your sister, she hissed. Daniel let out a small, amused laugh. How, exactly? She was standing outside crying in front of everyone. My mother snapped. You set her up. I feigned deep confusion. Mom, I really don't understand. We sent out invitations months ago. If Emma's name wasn't on the guest list, that wasn't something I handled. Maybe you should ask yourself what went wrong. She spluttered, eyes narrowing. I asked myself exactly that when the security told us she wasn't on the list. My father cut in. His voice was low, controlled, but beneath it was pure fury. And? I tilted my head. And I realized something. You've been playing us this whole time. The silence around us was deafening. The guests at nearby tables were listening. My mother leaned in, her voice shaking. You think you're so clever, don't you? Daniel smirked. We don't think, ma'am. We know. I watched as the realization fully hit my parents. They had been played. They had funded my wedding. They had fallen for every trap. And now, Emma was outside, humiliated. My mother's lips trembled with rage. My father's face was stone cold. And then, in the most perfectly timed moment of my life, Emma burst through the doors. Gasps rippled through the reception hall as Emma stormed in. Her face was smeared with mascara, her eyes swollen from crying. And she was still in her everyday clothes. She had no dress, no grand entrance, no moment of triumph, only anger. She marched toward me, her hands shaking. You, she hissed. I gave her a bright, polite smile. Oh, Emma, I wasn't sure you were coming. She let out a sharp, furious laugh. Are you serious? You left me outside. You destroyed my dress order. You kept my friends out. And now you're sitting here acting like I'm the crazy one? The entire room was silent. Everyone was watching. My mother reached for Emma's arm. Sweetheart, maybe we should... No. Emma yanked away. I want to hear her say it. I want to hear her admit it. I tilted my head. Admit what? Emma's eyes burned into mine. That you did this to me on purpose. I took a slow sip of my champagne. Then I set the glass down and leaned forward. Emma, I said softly, so only she and my parents could hear. You did this to yourself. Her breath hitched. I smiled. You tried to take my moment, and it backfired. Her hands curled into fists. You think you won? She whispered. I leaned back. I know I did. Daniel chuckled beside me. You'll get over it, Emma. That was the final breaking point. With a frustrated scream, Emma grabbed a glass from the nearest table and threw it. Right at me. The glass never hit me. Daniel, who had been expecting something like this, caught it midair. There was a collective gasp from the guests. Emma froze. My father grabbed her arm. Enough. My mother looked horrified. And then I heard it. The murmurs from the guests. She's lost it. I can't believe she did that. She's embarrassing herself. This is her own fault. Emma's face drained of color. For the first time in her life, she realized that no one was on her side. Not even our parents. Daniel set the glass down carefully. Then he turned to my father. I think it's best if you take Emma home, he said. My father, for once, didn't argue. He nodded stiffly, grabbed Emma's arm, and led her away. My mother hesitated, glancing at me. I didn't say a word. And finally, after a long moment, she turned and followed my father out. The doors swung closed behind them. I let out a deep breath, and then, in the most surreal moment of my life, the entire room burst into applause. People clapped, cheered, and as Daniel wrapped his arms around me, pressing a kiss to my forehead, I realized something. I was finally free. The air felt lighter after my parents and Emma left. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the next fight. I wasn't bracing for another betrayal. I was married. Happy. Free, and Emma? Emma had been exposed. The reception moved on quickly after the dramatic exit. People were eager to change the mood, and I couldn't blame them. The music started again, the drinks flowed, and laughter filled the room. I danced with Daniel, surrounded by people who actually cared about me. It was surreal. I had spent my entire life fighting for scraps of love and attention from my parents. I had wasted years trying to be enough. And in the end, I had been chasing something that was never real. I didn't need their validation. I had my own life now. A husband who stood by my side. Friends who had been there all along. A family that I was building for myself. Emma, my parents. They weren't a part of that anymore. And that thought? That was the most liberating feeling of all. The honeymoon flight was early the next morning. Daniel and I barely got 4 hours of sleep before heading to the airport. And as we waited to board, my phone buzzed. My mother. I sighed, staring at the screen. Daniel glanced over. Don't do it, he said. Don't let them drag you back in. I knew he was right, but something in me needed to hear what she had to say. So I picked up. Mom. A beat of silence. Then, you've really done it this time. I closed my eyes. Mom, if you're calling to lecture me, your sister is devastated, Linda, she snapped. You embarrassed her in front of everyone. How could you? How could I? I let out a soft laugh. Mom, are you really asking me that? I asked. After everything she did? My mother scoffed. She didn't deserve that level of humiliation. You should have just let her walk down the aisle. Would it really have hurt you? And there it was, the final confirmation. Even after everything, even after my wedding had almost been stolen from me, my mother still believed that I should have stepped aside for Emma, that I should have let her win, that I didn't deserve to have something for myself. And in that moment, I finally let go of any last hope that my parents would change. They wouldn't. They never would. I exhaled. You know what, Mom? I don't care anymore. A pause. Excuse me? I don't care what you think, I said, my voice steady. I don't care what you or Dad or Emma say about me. I'm done. Linda. I cut her off. Number, listen to me. I straightened my back, gripping my phone tightly. I spent my entire life being the afterthought in this family. I continued. I spent years letting you and Dad put Emma first. I let you make me feel like I was less than her. Like I had to fight for even the bare minimum of your love. My mother was silent. But not anymore, I said, my voice unwavering. This was the last time you tried to take something from me. And it didn't work. I won't be manipulated again. I won't fight for a place in your family. Because I don't need one. Linda, don't be ridiculous, she said, her voice sharp now. We're your parents. We're family. You don't just walk away from family. I smiled. Then maybe you shouldn't have treated me like a stranger my whole life. And then, before she could say another word, I hung up. Daniel was watching me carefully. You okay? I let out a breath. And for the first time in years, I actually meant my answer. Yeah, I'm good. Because I was. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I was free. Daniel wrapped an arm around me, pressing a kiss to my temple. Proud of you. I smiled, leaning into him. As we boarded the plane, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was it. A new chapter. A new life. One where I wasn't fighting to fit into someone else's expectations. One where I chose my own happiness. And as the plane took off, leaving everything behind, I knew one thing for certain. I had finally won.